Thank you very much to the members of both the organizing and the host committee for offering us this platform to present our work. I am Barbara Filser. I'm an art historian based at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology.
I'm Felix Mittelberger, Chief Archivist of ZGAM. I already introduced myself. No Time to Wait is an apt call not only for the preservation of audiovisual cultural heritage, but also for the full archival and scholarly description of preserved artifacts. In fact, in our understanding, this is an integral part of preservation efforts and vital in rendering archival material accessible. As you all know and suffer from, budgets are tight, and in the day-to-day work of museums, there is hardly any room for the substantial commitment this sort of groundwork demands. Also, it is work which mostly does not produce outcomes that conform the accepted measurements, units of productivity of museums and universities, naming exhibitions or publications. Usually the effort put into this kind of research remains largely invisible, despite providing an important informational base for curators and researchers to proceed from. Introducing students to archival description to us appears to be one way to raise awareness for the work involved in caring for archival material and collections, even for such mundane objects as this. The aim was, of course, also to gather relevant information about these objects and document it in a way that it could be entered into a collection or archival database.
We tried to tackle this task in what evolved into a series of 3 seminars with students of art history from KIT between 2020 and 2022. These took the videotape archive of the pioneering US-American video collective Raindance Foundation from the late 1960s and early 1970s as central object of research. We briefly introduced the Raindance Foundation and the scope of the foundation's video archives at ZKM. This is followed by a closer look at how we went about researching and describing material from these archives in the classroom, which also includes a basic description of the ZKM archival database. To conclude, we highlight important outcomes. The Raindance Foundation was founded as Raindance Corporation in 1969 in New York City and is usually only referred to as Raindance. The group's membership fluctuated even over the first few years, and key contributors had already left by 1972. Among the early associates were Frank Gillette, Beryl Corot, Paul Ryan, Ira Schneider, and Michael Schamberg, and it was Schneider who basically kept the Raindance Foundation going until 1993. Raindance set out to fight against, in the words of Paul Ryan, that system of perceptual imperialism called broadcast television that puts a terminal in your home and thereby controls your access to information. End of quote. To counter television's all-pervasive onslaught, people would need to engage in, the phrasing is again Paul Ryan's, cybernetic guerrilla warfare. Their weapons of choice were the relatively small and lightweight video cameras and recorders that were first marketed in the US in the late 1960s by Sony, whose Portapack became eponymous for affordable portable video systems at the time. Raindance were, of course, not the only ones seeking to establish some form of counter-television to the large US broadcast corporations. They were part of an interconnected but fractious scene that encompassed collectives across the US, such as the Video Freaks, People's Video Theater, and Farm or Video Free America. Raindance, however, were probably the most vocal among these early adopters and gained notoriety through their publishing activities. Radical software first and foremost. Appearing from 1970 to 1974, This newsletter turned magazine was pointedly characterized by media historian Deirdre Boyle as, I quote, "the video underground's Bible, gossip sheet, and chief networking tool," end of quote. Besides writings on theoretical and practical issues of video, Radical Software also contained brief notes on video activities and information on video initiatives in the US and abroad. And an important feature in the early issues were the listings of tapes available to buy, exchange, or rent, appearing under the header Cultural Data Bank. Another Raindance publication that influenced the perception of early activist use of video in the US is Guerrilla Television, written by Michael Schamberg. The 1971 book contains advice on how to make alternative television, but also doubles as Raindance's manifesto, opening with a theoretical exposition of the seminal role portable video was to play in the media revolution happening at the time. The guerrilla television they called for did not simply want to provide other content than regular broadcast TV. It aspired to building an alternative electronic information system that was supposed to be participatory in nature. Raindance thus conceptually foreshadowed online video sharing platforms. Raindance's print publications granted the group long-lasting visibility. Despite Ira Schneider's efforts at preserving their audiovisual legacy, however, their work with tape, like much video from that era, has largely slipped from sight. The rapid demise of analog video formats ushered in by the advent of digital recording and storage played its part as well.
With the Laboratory for Antiquated Video Systems run by Dorcas Müller, ZGAM houses the expertise and facilities for restoring and digitalizing obsolete analog video formats, thus laying the essential groundwork for bringing this important part of media cultural heritage back to light. Also involved in this effort are the ZGAM archives, which are tasked with indexing and describing the tapes entering the archive. ZGAM holds large bodies of tape from both the Raindance Foundation and a number of individual members. The core is formatted by the collective's more than 500 tapes that were handed over to ZGAM by the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 2009. Between 2000 and 2022, the video archives of the group members Ira Schneider, Paul Ryan, and Frank Gillette were gifted as additions to the Raindance video collection. Together, the holdings comprise more than 2,300 tapes in a wide variety of formats, many of them in open reel. They include, among others, recordings of the collective's own activities, interviews with people on the streets, taped talks by contemporary intellectuals, meeting of videomakers, counterculture events, current affairs, and addressed by politicians recorded off the TV, as well as experiments with video aesthetics and materials used in media art installations. All of these tapes have been indexed in the database and photo documented at ZKM. Around 650 selected tapes have been restored and digitalized to this date. A selection of the Raindance archive has been shown at the ZKM in 2017 and 18 in the exhibition Radical Software, curated by George Parker, Judith Beer, and Margit Rosen. Videos dating from the group's inception to its formal dissolutions were presented alongside the constructions of video installations by members of the group, such as Ira Schneider and Gillette's semi-closed circuit piece Wipe Cycle from 1969. In preparation of the exhibition, selected tapes were catalogued and annotated. The majority of the tapes, however, were not further described.
I chose the Raindance Foundation archive for the seminars because I've been researching and teaching early video for well over a decade now. The focus on archival description, however, came about somewhat accidentally. The pandemic restrictions had forced a change of plan that had to accommodate a sudden shift to online teaching, and of course all the problems that came with the closures of public institutions and research facilities. seminar participants were provided with digital viewing copies of the videos via the self-hosted cloud of ZKM. The original material on formats like OpenReel, U-matic, and Betamax could, of course, not have been handled by untrained persons anyway. The ZKM archive database was made accessible via browser so that students were able to perform searches and enter data from at home. In the beginning, we used a cloned version. Later, we switched to the real database, but with access restricted to the sections we actually needed to work with.
Before the seminar groups gained access to the ZKM archive database, I instructed them on how to use it in practice. In order to familiarize students with what from them represented a new instrument of academic work, I introduced them to the basic benefits, structure, and functionality of a relational database. Over the course of the seminar, participants repeatedly practice entering data directly into the database, and in the end, we are able to create entries on their own. For this purpose, I added explanatory boxes that inform about what data to enter into the respective input fields and what format to use, for example, for dates. In the ZKM archive database, videos are regarded as data carriers, and thus collections of objects. One such data carrier, a single tape, can contain several objects or units of meaning. The archival description of the Raindance holdings thus involve the identification of instances where multiple recordings exist on a single tape, and the following division of these recordings into discrete archival objects. The segmented objects are then linked to other entities via the database, since the ZKM archive database is structured as a network of entities of different types. 4 entity types are linked to the archival item. There's, for example, person, groups, and organizations in their specific relation to the object, then keywords, works, and events. A video recording of people bathing in the nude, for example, as can be linked to Raindance as a creator, the Alternative Media Conference in 1970 as the event at which this happened, Goddard College as the institution which hosted this conference, and Plainfield, Vermont in the USA as the place where the campus is located. With these entities, building a network references can also be established between each of them. For example, between persons and events, or between persons and work.
Working with seminar groups of about 5 to 6 students, the number of objects we were able to fully describe turned out to be relatively small. Around 10 to 12 tapes, about 20 minutes length per seminar. I had not been able to preview most of the Raindance material before the start of the first seminar, so I tried to identify thematic groups from the information transcribed from the labels. And that is how we ended up with about 17 minutes of naked people in a pond. Having come across a note reading Alternative Media Goddard, for example, I searched the database for further references to the conference at Goddard College. This yielded 9 tapes with recordings from this meeting of makers of underground media like magazines, comics, radio, and video, of course, which had been characterized as an elite Woodstock. Working with thematic groupings like that, the seminar participants were able to collaborate on gathering information, pool their research efforts, and exchange findings. This, of course, made the unfamiliar task of describing seemingly random recordings a lot easier. Other sets encompassed 6 tapes recorded at a series of meetings between members of New York video collectives and representatives of the New York State Council on the Arts in 1970. The heated discussions about how the generous funds promised by the Council could best be allocated provided valuable insight into the collective's ideas what uses video could be put to. Another group of videos documented activities on the first Earth Day in 1970 in New York City. Among them, the closure of parts of Fifth Avenue to traffic for a few hours. These are examples of so-called street tapes, a genre peculiar to video that was explained as, I quote from guerrilla television, people standing on the street with a porta pack and picking up on what's going down, end of quote. Material dealing with video art also made up a larger set of tapes, including recordings of the first US exhibitions of the new genre, TV as a creative medium in 1969 at the Howard Weiss Gallery in New York, and, as you see here, vision and television at the Rose Art Museum at Brandeis University in Massachusetts in 1970. Seminar participants were tasked with identifying people, places, events, institutions, and in this case, of course, the artworks on tape. They then had to create the respective entries and link these or already existing entries, for example, from the ZKM biographical database or created by other seminar participants, to the entries for the video recordings. The information they had to start from were the mainly scant and sometimes puzzling notes on the tape reels and boxes. Thus, the amount of research that had to be done to be able to just put names to people, for example, was already considerable and not always successful. The New York State Council on the Arts meetings were such a case. Efforts were made to identify the participants, but foundered when it came to the people of color involved in the video makers' debates. This pointed up what seems to be a research gap in the history of activist and community-oriented uses of video in the US in these early years. Problems like this, but also issues like what kind of information warranted inclusion in the database entries, or how to determine a date of creation when none was given, were discussed in our weekly online class meetings alongside research strategies and progresses. In addition, students wrote short textual descriptions of the contents of individual tapes. They did this also for events, institutions, works, places, or people on these tapes that were relevant to the Raindance archives or media art in general. These texts had to offer factual descriptions containing relevant keywords rather than art historical interpretations, because in archival practice, the primary concern is linking entities with the respective archival terms to render them addressable and findable. Learning outcomes for the students encompass both knowledge of the history of media art as well as transferable skills regarding research techniques and the documentations of findings in an archival database. As far as subject content is concerned, the Raindance Foundation video archive also offered glimpses of the seminal cultural, social, and political events and debates of the 1960s and 70s in the US, like the Vietnam War, civil rights movement, women's liberation, growing awareness of environmental issues, and the first walk on the moon, aired live on television.
On the level of practical skills, seminar participants gained hands-on experience of that kind of standard groundwork that underpins any art historical evaluation, analysis, and interpretation of works. The seminars furthered an application of how much work and expertise go into securing and verifying historical data and the kind of basic description at the heart of archives and collection databases. Even though the seminar yield archival description only for a very small number of tapes, they provided information that further engagement with the material can build up on. In fact, some of the recordings the students had worked on found their way into another seminar project, the exhibition Antenna, frequencies from the archive currently on display at ZKM, which was a cooperation between ZKM and Karlsruhe University of Arts.
Working on individual tapes strengthened the impression that the Raindance video archive material from 1969 to 1972 represents the remnants of the electronic information system, this cultural data bank that they aimed to build. The seminars even brought to light research gaps regarding the early US video scene. Aspects of diversity, as I've just addressed, but also video's place within the wider alternative media landscape of the period merit further examination, of course, as well as the archive itself.
In light of this, it seems only natural to think about possible ways to muster further practical support for the full archival description of audiovisual material, maybe from outside the university classroom. An initiative like the Smithsonian Participatory Science Program, under which digital volunteers are recurring for transcribing archival documents, might be worth looking at more closely as a potential model. The participatory aspect would at least fit the spirit of guerrilla television. Thank you. And that.
Do we have any burning questions? Actually, a single one? Yes, in the back.
Hi, Bria from the University of North Texas. I have a question. Was there metadata guidelines that the students were trained in to create content description, keywords, subject headings, and how was inclusive description incorporated into the records?
So actually, I have to admit, we sort of worked this on the fly because we really had to change plans really fast because of the COVID pandemic. What we had planned to do at first was more of a curatorial exploration of the archive. Something like that happened later on with students from the University of Arts. So we had to sort of improvise and develop these sort of, I think we never had formal guidelines, but we developed what we need in a very close discussion with the students and of course with Felix, who set up the database. And since we were such a small group, this worked out really well. I think we would have had problems if we had 20 students or more. So this sort of very informal classroom situation actually only worked with a group as small as what we had.
All right, that's all the questions that we have time for, but they would be happy to talk with you during the break. We need to thank you for your time. Sorry, thank you for the presentation.